The last master plan for Harare was gazetted in 1993, and it was out of date by 2013. So essentially, since 2013, Harare has been existing without a master plan. So that's the essence of this. But I want to underline some key terms in what a master plan is. In that, the sole object is to enhance order, promote economy, engender convenience, as well as preserve the heritage and the environment in the process of development. So this puts the discussion within the framework that planners are not essentially mutilators of the environment. But in essence, the law requires that in the process of practicing their work, or cities or local authorities being managed, they ought to engender those principles. And more often they are competing for many concepts, especially which Harare is not mistaken, cannot be mistaken. Then the master plan sets goals, objectives, policies, and strategies to achieve a desired future. So what we essentially are looking at is to envision the future that we want. And we are busy working on a visioning positioning statement for Harare so that it informs the written statement which my colleague Mr. Bukuza has alluded that we are working on. Then in terms of its preparation is prescribed by the law, which is the Regional Town and Country Planning Act, and the General Master Local Plan Regulations of 1977. They prescribe the form and content of a master plan, as I have alluded to earlier on. But what is critical to underline there, amongst the issues of focus, the Act and accompanying regulations prescribe that a master plan should focus on principal environmental characteristics. It should focus on socio-economic characteristics, it should focus on transportation or communication and public utilities, among other issues. But I want to underline the environment that is prescribed the law, and we are required to look at those elements. And I'm underlining the drainage system, the rivers, which make the center of focus of this workshop, around which is a discussion around the wetlands, around the hydrological regime itself. So that we are required to focus on those. But in our results, I will choose out a few issues that we would want to underline. This is our study area that we focused on, which is the Harare region. And as you would see, there is no major land feature that you could see on Harare, or major landmark. So which essentially points to the fact that Harare is a landlocked city, and its only major physical feature are its rivers. So and which areas which also our wetlands naturally okay. And the worship, I would want to drive towards a discussion of declaring Harare a wetland city. And that's where I'm coming from this background, the basic appreciation that the center of attraction for Harare, from a physiographic point of view, is the river system. So that's our physical, our major defining phenomenon. In terms of climatic, already we said it, we're essentially in a tropical region, and we receive rainfalls above 800 millimeters per year, and our temperatures are moderate, they are not extremes as compared to other regions. So, but that is a bearing in terms of the rainfall retention, the amounts of rainfall that we receive over time. And our key highlights we want to focus on a number of issues under the environment. We want to drive discussion around issues of air quality, issues of hydrological regime, issues of urban growth patterns that will be observed, which have a bearing on wetlands and so forth. So we'll present preliminary results, we'll present our results on those elements. We looked at methane distribution and emissions within the city. And methane naturally is a gas that comes from decomposing organic matter. So this map essentially shows the spatial distribution of methane emissions across the city. You could relate that the highest observations were observed in the southern and western parts of the city, as opposed to the northwestern parts of the city. And this gas is bearing even on human health. It affects bearing on causing respiratory illnesses. You might, and so as you can see from this pattern, you can see the level of exposure of low-income population around there. We move to another one. We also make the sulfur dioxide. That one is mainly concentrated around the peripheries, which speaks to use of off-grid sources of energy because it's a result of combustion activities. So there's settlements in the period in our farming communities, they are using off resources of energy, which speaks to that. We also established carbon dioxide concentration. Also noted that it's the carbon stocks and fluxes are relatively lower in the high density, in the low density suburbs, which is the northwestern part, which is green. Green means low, red means high. So we see out that our population in the central parts and southwestern parts have a high exposure to pollution, air pollution, and there's a high concentration of carbon dioxide in those areas. Also looked at formaldehyde, which is an organic compound released into the atmosphere from industrial activities. It's also quite higher in the northwestern part of the city, which has this exposure of that population to there. So we're looking at coming up with environmental policies that can offset some of these. As you would relate, some colleagues here might be saying, what's the essence of this? You've seen in developing countries when we import cars, some of them come with catalytic converters. Those cars will be phased out in those countries, but we're importing them here. The sole reason why they are cutting off those cars from their system is because of exacerbating exposure of their population to some of these environmental hazards. But for us, as a city, perhaps you're watching your blessing, we can put a cutoff on specific use of certain vehicles and so forth, among other interventions. And we also looked at nitrogen distribution across the city of Harare. We noticed that there's a high concentration from the central western part of the city in terms of nitrate, distribution of nitrates, and these are harmful to health. And we may find these nitrates also in our water bodies, which is increasing the cost of water purification has been on record for Harare. And some of these are also arising from industrial waste. We notice that industrial waste in Harare is not really pragmatically managed. It's like a free-for-all. Some of them are dumping into drainage systems. Some of them are disposing in open surfaces. So the level of compliance to this is relatively low in Harare. So there needs to be a policy effect around there, and this finds itself into our water bodies. We also looked at the geology and soils, looked at pH distribution across the city. Likewise, you could see that the soils in the industrial areas in the northwestern district, which are high density areas, are highly alkaline, they are very acidic, which also points to different fluctuations of these environmental pollutants or variables in our ecosystem. Also characterize the tree height or canopy cover as a variable wanting to establish the level of tree cover within the city, because it also has a bearing on handling particular matter and pollutants within the atmosphere. We know that tree height is high in eastern suburbs and very low in the southern parts of the city. It also has a bearing on cleaning some of those atmospheric pollutants that you have seen. For example, increased concentration of carbon dioxide in high density suburbs could be offset through planting more vegetation so that we promote carbon sequestration and so forth. So you can see those variables playing in the city. We also look at biomass, which is the total amount or mass of plants within a particular area. Plant biomass is high in the low density suburbs because of the character of development and management scenarios, and very relatively low in our high density suburbs and so forth. We also look at green space fragmentation across the city. Naturally, green space is the whole object and concept of ecology is to ensure that green spaces are interconnected. But for Harare, there's been attrition, there's been extreme fragmentation of our green spaces. They are no longer a network or a system. So you would see that our ecological populations are now increasingly isolated in what we call ecological threats and so forth, among other variables. So that's the parameter there. But so quite encouraging to observe that for academic park and woodlands, that mass of nature is still quite intact, and the level of plant biomass there is quite encouraging. We also established or tested the fragmentation of those habitats with species distribution and diversity, and we used birds as an indicator to establish the level of ecosystem health in Harare. We could observe that from this is called non-metric multi-dimensional scaling technique, which we use to distinguish or to compare neighborhoods or types of land use or type of land cover types and their relationship with species distribution. We observed that there are similar variations observed within the central business district, the high density areas, and high-density areas in terms of species distribution, they are akin to low levels of species abundance, whereas open space grassland and open space forested areas are correlated in terms of the level of biodiversity, which points that low levels of density attract improved biodiversity and so forth. And in this instance, we use birds because they are highly mobile and they can fly in the middle of a disturbance. But we see those patterns playing out that our level of species richness in the city is extremely fragmented in the area. We also looked at biodiversity happiness, which is a measure of biodiversity happiness. So we could actually establish that our results indicate that the green part means low levels of happiness. The red part means high levels of or improved levels of happiness. We actually see that biodiversity integrity is not happy in Harare. So and it becomes happy as we move away from the city because of limited disturbance, among other things. And we tested those relationships through some regression models and we were able to validate those findings. We also looked at waste management. These results are from a socio-economic survey that we did across the city. We observed that in terms of waste management, waste is red, blue means red means never. So there are significant portions of the city where solid waste is not collected. Whereas some areas are collected monthly. The green one means those areas the refuse collection is done monthly. The pink one, this one is the yellow, so cyan yellow. It indicates that they are collected daily, and gray means weekly, and gray means daily. But by and large, the picture indicates that solid waste collection in Harare is a major issue. The levels of collection are wide, and if that waste is not collected, it ends up in our environment, it ends up being burnt. That's why those higher levels of acute levels of air pollution. It ends up finding its way into our wetlands, through illegal dump sites, or being washed off into our river systems and so forth. Among other wetlands we have. Much of the land that we call wetlands in Harare are predominantly private properties. So it speaks to a challenge in terms of enforcing environmental laws, because there are other regulations or laws governing private property usage, which tends to come into play. But basically, as you can see, all the red elements you see are properties falling in wetlands. So it's also quite the fact that Harare is a wetland city. Then these are also wetlands that have been critically recently developed, which speaks to the continual or perpetual loss of wetland space within Harare. We also wanted to look at this within the context of the larger urban land use structure of the city. The land use structure of the city was framed around the 1993 master plan. It was a combination master plan which included all the other local authorities. And as per that master plan, as you can see on that first map there, around it, there is that color which is the dark yellow. It meant that whole land was going to be agricultural land. The red dots you see around were meant to be controlled growth centers. This was around 1993. And what happened over time, it means that Rua, as you would see towards this direction coming, which is to your left, to your right, if you are sitting there, those red dots that you are seeing here, it meant that Rua was seen to be was programmed due to that master plan to be a growth point. But now it's what now a town. Epworth was also a growth point. Norton was also a growth point further between Miami and Lake Chile, you could see. But all these are now fully fledged urban settlements. Shitungweza was the only predominant urban settlement that was then programmed and provided for. And there was no provision for urban development around the Harare boundaries for Harare. A lot of variations took place post-2000, perhaps as a result of land acquisition program, the first land reform program, as well as the rise in self-help housing schemes, most of which exacerbated subdivisions around the city. And in effect, the city is now in an ecological threat. As you see here is also, this is how we program within an 18-kilometer radius from Harare. The 28-kilometer radius from Harare wanted to establish the changes and transitions that have happened during that time. And this, as in 1993, all the green wages that you are seeing, they were connected. Those were our public open spaces and our wetlands. But now all of those have been decimated. We could relate to that map. This is the map of current land uses for Harare. You can see that we have minor remnants of green spaces that you can see there. The bulk of them have been developed. Then this table is essentially land use budget for Harare as present. And we realize that what constitutes open spaces or wetlands is either active open space or public or open, general open space. This open space is called passive, this one is called active. Active means you can develop certain facilities that are eco-friendly, like your restaurants, your wedding venues, and so forth. Passive means you cannot interfere with it. So naturally, this is where our wetlands would occur. So that's 5% plus 7%, that's around 4% in the area, which is gazetted public open spaces. Some of them are wetlands, some are not. Some of them are your Harare Garden, some of them are Africa Youth Square within that threshold. Anything that we are calling wetland is either residential, commercial, industrial, low density or high density land, which is dominantly privately owned. So then it gives you a circumstance, a complex circumstance to manage and mitigate the adverse effects of development on them, and how we can limit those private entities that are in ownership of that land for them to use it. So that threshold of what we have available as wetland is quite wide. And we make recommendations in this plan in terms of how best we can grow that wetland reservation from private hands into public hands or into sovereign land. I will make recommendations for that in my closing remarks. Also, the urban growth model over time is from 1984 to 2024. The purple colors represents the period 1984 and 1990. But quite striking is what happened in 2020, the red one. There has been a large transition between year 2010 and year 2020. Harare has witnessed serious growth. And much of that growth has been highly exponential. We could see by this graph presentation in terms of how the transition from 2010 to 2024. It's quite huge and steep. That has been quite dramatic. And much of that growth has been happening in our areas that preserved as open spaces or as wetlands. We focus on that growth over time. From year 1984 to 2024, that's the illustration of the historical and previous area within our Harare region. We also looked at focusing that growth using Markov chain analysis. I'm glad there is a doc from UZ who apparently was in my lecture. So we used Markov chain analysis to transition from the classroom into real practice to be able to focus and predict urban growth up until say 2040, which is the lifespan period of the new master plan. So it simply measures, it's a robust model, a spatial model to measure transitions in space, transitions from one land use type to another, in order for us to predict urban growth and where growth is going to occur. Also looked at selected several drivers, such as elevation, such as the distance from roads, such as distance from city center, and population variables and economic variables, like economic employment corridors and so forth. So we looked at all those things. So in terms of our key highlights, we observed that we did a modest scenario and a worst case scenario. We used 100 trees in terms of the modeling effect. We're trying to see how, if this trend under extreme circumstances, if it will change. But what we could predict is that there's going to be growth in the peri-urban areas of the city and much more concentrated towards the southwestern parts of the city. So that's based on that model, these are the results that we could find. There's limited attrition within the city center area, as you will see there. And we project that 85% of this growth will happen on wetlands. Those are open spaces. That's the historically non-built up area. You see from our model as we explain that. So this is a growth scenario from 2024, in which we simulated using this model. Essentially trying to train our model to say if we can observe, if we simulate, are they similar? So we observed that there were no significant differences. Therefore, we were able to, with confidence, to focus. We observed that from 2030, this is what Harare will be like in 2030, this is what it will be in 2040, at this rate. Unless policies and strategies are taken to curtail urban growth, this is where Harare is going. It's going to be burgeoning and probably to house more than 50% of Zimbabwe's population, and so forth. We also focused on perfected that model and tried to
ask you to please so that I want to manage my life.
Thank you. So we also looked at historical projections. The blue line reflects our projected urban growth, and the green line reflects the decline in historical non-built-up area. So there is going to be a decline up until 2040, and that decline is likely to continue unless policies and interventions are undertaken. We came up with strategies and concluding remarks. We came up with strategies in the master plan, which we are working on now. We're working on the policy side, having studied the environment and all other thematic issues. As it relates to the environment, the master plan is adopting an optimistic view than a pessimistic one. The pessimistic one is let's let business be as business as usual. Zimbabwe has its challenges. The city has its challenges. Everyone has problems. Let's do nothing. But we're choosing a pessimistic view, an optimistic view, to look at the city's elements or at elements that can transform the city. And one of them is this biophysical environment. We want to inspire the city to be a city that connects its citizens with its natural assets. And we are building a theme around what we call the biophilic city concept. That a city should be wild in nature. People should be encouraged to like nature. People should be encouraged to interact and interface with nature. And the only way we can do that is to bring out people from our radial roads into our river systems. So we are coming up with proposals to open cycle tracks, walkways, and trails. People like jogging. More often on weekends, we might see populations on the road under police escort and so forth, simply because there are no recreational areas that are enough within the city. So one way of conserving wetlands is to build the people's affinity to them and their connection to them and corporate connection to them. Like our previous presenter always spoke about the business case around corporates and the environment, is to bring back people back to nature and connect them through bringing in walkways, cycle tracks around our wetlands, and allowing for private sector participation and allowing for citizen participation in wetland restoration. Those are some of the issues that we are looking at from a policy point of view. So we are looking at turning up open spaces into access routes, into walkways, into cycle tracks, into trails that we can connect communities to these spaces. We're also looking at making proposals for development of a series of retention ponds. Like you have seen, we have had a very good season, a late season of rain, but much of that rain is gone. So we're looking at possibilities of restoring our wetlands through creation of retention ponds and enforcing upon property owners that have decimated wetlands to develop retention ponds. And this concept is being used in Windhoek, Namibia, like pumping water into sand and slowly released into the environment. And they're not having water challenges like us. This is Windhoek, which is already doing that in our region. So we're looking at all those issues. We're looking at the development strategies that promote densification and redevelopment. But we have a big task to do, our worship, that there ought to be work and effort towards our infrastructure improvement for us to be able to anchor the levels of densification that can turn us away from wetlands, that can turn people or developers from developing wetlands. We are not yet a densified city. Our levels of densification are extremely low. The only adopted model for densification in Harare are the clusters, and that's not densification. Densification involves smart growth and utilization of vertical space. So that's what we need to drive towards. We cannot stop people from coming to Harare. They were having castles in the past. Unfortunately, we may not be at liberty to implement them now. But what is essential is for us to come up with creative models of densifying and using our space, anchored by solid, substantial infrastructure on water and sewer reticulation, as well as an improved road network and public transport system. Only then we might be able to offset some of those environmental challenges. But this is where my presentation ends. I thank you.